Good evening, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer. The guy I call your reluctant prophet. I'm kind of reluctant tonight because it is Halloween, and me wee dog may bark at any moment. So please bear with me. The other reason I'm reluctant is because of the difficulty of the topics that I need to discuss. And today's topic is very difficult. The source of our present troubles. How did critical race theory and other neo-Marxist ideas permeate our culture? We need to go back to the Second World War and to William Wild Bill Donovan, who is the head of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, which was the antecedent to the CIA, who hired several members of the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism to help the United States understand Nazism. Their involvement led to the OSS using what is known as cultural Marxist critical theory and their analysis of Nazi Germany to the advantage of the secret services, but much to the detriment of America in the long run. They ensured that the cultural Marxist tool of dialectical analysis would synthesize new ways of viewing reality. Their goal was not merely to defeat Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, but also to influence academia and politics. This process is known as the Long March through the institutions. By the 1960s, students who had been subjected to this ideological thinking had become slaves to the simulacra that the Frankfurt School had helped to create. Simulacra which have been successfully employed to replace reality with dialectical illusions. Simulacra have long been of interest to philosophers. In his Sophist, Plato speaks of two kinds of image making. The first is a faithful reproduction, attempted to copy precisely the original. The second is intentionally distorted in order to make the copy appear correct to viewers. He gives the example of Greek statuary, which was crafted larger on the top than on the bottom, so that viewers on the ground would see it correctly. If they could view it in scale, they would realize it was malformed. This example from the visual arts serves as a metaphor for the philosophical arts and the tendency of some philosophers to distort the truth so that it appears accurate unless viewed from the proper angle. Nietzsche addresses the concept of simulacrum, but does not use the term, in The Twilight of the Idols, suggesting that most philosophers, by ignoring the reliable input of their senses and resorting to the constructs of language and reason, arrive at a distorted copy of reality. And what has resulted? Identity politics, anti-Semitism, censorship, taxing the very air we breathe to stop the weather, crony capitalism, woke capitalism, corrupt investment banking policies, and the list goes on ad infinitum. Therefore, if you wonder, as I do, why society has come to believe in delusional ideation, look no further than to Hegel, who is always patiently waiting at the beginning of the dialectical path toward totalitarianism to guide us along the way. And of course, the cultural Marxists from the Frankfurt School also sought to wage war on free market capitalism. I just heard noted hedge fund manager Sir Paul Marshall, who was speaking at the London conference of the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, assert that the world needs another Teddy Roosevelt to take on the vested interests to rid the business world of cronyism, regulatory capture, and woke false virtue to make free enterprise once again, a pillar of human flourishing. He also stated that the bank crisis of 2008 was the largest transference of wealth from the poor to the rich in human history, where the bankers privatized the gains and socialized the losses for their own corruption and planning failures. Again, during COVID-19, with constitutional and ineffective lockdowns, small businesses were crushed, while multinational conglomerates continued on unimpeded, even as the pharmaceutical industry gained immunity from the consequences for untested gene therapy being unleashed on an unsuspecting public with the full cooperation of governments throughout the West. And one of the deadliest versions of critical theory, known as critical race theory, which has been forced into public consciousness in the wake of Hamas's demonic attack on innocents in Israel. Even the Canadian government has appointed a special envoy to deal with this. From the Canadian government's own website, I provide the link. Look at it for yourself, but I'll read from that. In the wake of Hamas's large-scale terrorist attack against Israel, the world was again reminded that anti-Semitism is not a relic of the past. It is a daily reality experienced by Jewish communities here in Canada and around the world. Anti-Semitism is not a problem for the Jewish community to confront alone. We all have an obligation to continue to speak up against it whenever and wherever it occurs. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, today announced the appointment of Deborah Lyons as Canada's new special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. Ms. Lyons will serve for a term of 2 years. End of quote. From the government's website. Just yesterday, I had someone attempt to deny that critical race theory had increased anti-Semitism on campuses today. Make no mistake, your taxes are being used to fund instructions in hatred in our university due to this toxic CRT ideology. I, for one, will never rest until this ideological poison is extracted from our institutions of higher learning and see those responsible for it being there charged with disseminating hate. So back to how critical race theory came to North America. William Wild Bill Donovan hired the following members of the Frankfurt School who were: 1. Franz Leopold Neumann was a German political activist, Western Marxist theorist, and labor lawyer. He became a political scientist in exile and is best known for his theoretical analyses of Nazism. He studied in German in the United Kingdom and spent the last phase of his career in the United States. Neumann's main field of expertise was law and political science. He earned a doctorate in 1923 with his thesis on method in the theory of punishment. His main aim was to explain the socialist acceptance of liberal individualism in this sphere, in contradiction to socialist theory. During World War II, Neumann worked for the Office of Strategic Services from 1943 to 1945. His analysis concluded, like the behemoth in Jewish mythology and the writings of Thomas Hobbes, Hitler's regime was a chaotic, lawless, and amorphous monster. Its policies expressed the sometimes overlapping and sometimes contending drives of the four symbiotic but separate power centers: the Nazi Party, the German state bureaucracy, the armed forces, and big business that composed it. Both the enormous might and inherent vulnerability of Nazi Germany stemmed, according to Neumann, from its very nature as a conspiracy among these four self-interested groups, each of which sought to expand German power and territory without ceding authority or status to any of the other parties. Quote from Germany, Behemoth, the structure and practice of National Socialism showed his unique expertise. 2. Herbert Marcuse was a German-American philosopher, social critic, and political theorist associated with the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. He studied at the Humboldt University of Berlin and then at Freiburg, where he received his PhD. Marcuse's philosophy was deeply influenced by both Marxism and Freudian theories. He criticized capitalism, modern technology, Soviet communism, and popular culture, arguing that they represent new forms of social control. His notable ideas include technological rationality, great refusal, one-dimensional man, work as free play, repressive tolerance, repressive desublimation, negative thinking, and totalitarian democracy. In his book Eros and Civilization, published in 1955, Marcuse argued for a widened experience of sexuality through the embrace of Eros in general, within polymorphous sensuality, fantasy, and the arts. Sounds like Canada today. He was a leading inspiration to the Flower Children, the theme of Make Love Not War, and a great portion of the rock music and drug culture of the age. Marcuse's work had a significant influence on the leftist movements of the 1960s. Some even consider him the father of the New Left. It is crucial to understand Marcuse in order to understand where we are now. The radical students of 1968 are now our professors and politicians. And I provide a web link to the following that I'm going to read from this link. Marcuse instructed his acolytes to sell their totalitarianism as tolerance, partisan tolerance, which he introduced in an essay he penned in 1965 as a guide for how to shut down debate and silence the critics of critical theory. According to Marcuse, classical tolerance has failed our societies. Why? Because it tolerates all ideas, even though those ideas are wrong. As a result, tolerance, as it has been practiced since the word has had any meaning at all, is in fact repressive tolerance, since it permits the expression of unjust views that perpetrate exploitation and oppression. As a result, we must redefine tolerance in such a way that oppression is removed, meaning that from now on, one need only tolerate that which does not maintain established social, societal, or norms of oppression. Tolerance, to be real tolerance, must be partisan tolerance. Oh, God. And third, Otto Kirchheimer was a German jurist of Jewish ancestry and a political scientist of the Frankfurt School. His work essentially covered the state and its constitution. During the Weimar Republic, Kirchheimer came to the prominence with sensational analysis of the relationship between social structures and constitutions. His essay from 1930, Weimar und was dann? Entstehung und Gegenwart der Weimar Verfassung. Weimar and then what? Origins and present of the Weimar Constitution. My German is terrible, by the way. I can speak Norwegian fairly well, but not German. In which Kirchheimer described the Weimar Constitution as an unsustainable foundation of the state, was widely discussed. Kirchheimer worked as a research analyst at the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, starting in World War II and continuing to 1952. He also worked for 4 years as a researcher in the Institute for Social Research. He began working with George Rouch on Sozialstruktur und Strafverfolgung, punishment and social structure. Again, I don't speak German. The Rusch-Kirchheimer version of Punishment and Social Structure was published in 1939 as the first English-language publication of the Institute. As Otto Kirchheimer worked as a research analyst at the forerunner of the CIA starting during World War II and continuing to 52, he was responsible for preparing analyses. Together with Franz Neumann, Herbert Marcuse, and others, he helped turn the OSS to be the place where the left Hegelian Weltgeist, or world spirit, found its temporary abode and spread from there into academia and politics. This is the origin of the ideas which drive the Besserwissers who share in his ideas to constantly harp on about global governance. My thoughts. Remarkably, the weaponization of dialectical analysis created by the Jews from the Frankfurt School has become the very tool which is now being used to persecute Jews. After all, the members of the Frankfurt School fled Nazi Germany to escape National Socialism because they were Jews. Nazism was yet another totalitarian ideology that employed Hegelian dialectics to analyze the structure of reality. And so I inquired of those from the left who remain friends on social media. To my socially conscious friends, have you not read about the horrendous, unconscionable, anti-Semitic racists screaming Jew hatred in our universities? How on earth do you think this is possible? University professors teaching CRT are indoctrinating kids at the taxpayers' expense to hate Jews and view terrorists with rose-colored glasses. Type CRT in any university of your choosing into Google to find out that this hideous ideology is being taught in all of them. Why are you still silent about this? I asked them. And you guessed it, not one from the left responded. Apparently, they only care about hate when you dislike or challenge something that they believe, namely, that it is appropriate to hate others who do not think like you. This is why I have very few friends from the left remaining on my social media feeds. These include my dearest and oldest friends and closest family members. Oh, how very loving they are, especially given the fact that I have not stopped caring for them. Wink. First reading, How Canada Spent Millions Pushing an Ideology Used to Frame Jews as Oppressors. The doctrine of anti-racism, now mandatory across the federal civil service, holds that Jews have become white to benefit from white supremacy. Author of the article, Tristan Hopper, published October 2023 in the Montreal Gazette. First reading, and I'll read from this article. How Canada Spent Millions Pushing an Ideology Used to Frame Jews as Oppressors. The doctrine of anti-racism, now mandatory across the federal civil service, holds that Jews have become white to benefit from white supremacy. Taxpayers' money put to good use. Top story. Hamas terrorists were still in the process of pulling Israeli civilians from their homes and executing them when McMaster University Associate Professor Emil Joseph wrote on X.com that post-colonial, anti-colonial, and decolonial are not just words you heard in your DEI workshop, diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. I turn it around. I call it DIE, because that's obviously what it causes, death. DEI refers to diversity, equity, and inclusion, an ideology touting anti-racism and decolonization that has come to define massive swaths of Canadian academia in recent years. And Joseph was far from the only Canadian academic to excuse the mass murder of more than 1,000 people using words from a DEI glossary. Decolonization is not just a theory, was a sign held by a woman in a Carleton University jacket attending an Ottawa rally celebrating the October 7th attacks. Mohammed Fadel, a law professor at the University of Toronto, recirculated posts cheering Hamas fighters who crossed into their colonizers' territory. Black Lives Matter Canada, a group that federal government has openly endorsed as a source on racial equity, issued a statement that made no mention whatsoever of the October 7th violence, saying only that Israel was an apartheid oppressor state engaged in the torture and murder of Palestinians. In just the last 5 years, the Trudeau government has leaned hard into a project to remake the federal government under the guise of anti-racism, stemming from the U.S.-created discipline of critical race theory. Here we go right back to the Frankfurt School and the forerunner to the CIA. Anti-racism is wholly different from the principles of tolerance, multiculturalism, and equal treatment that used to characterize the federal approach to race. Rather, anti-racism holds that Canada's structures are so irredeemably racist that, in the words of Ottawa's own literature on the subject, it can be defeated only with deliberate systems and supports favoring marginalized groups. Canada now has a federal anti-racism secretariat. It spent $45 million on an official anti-racism strategy and showered grants onto an archipelago of anti-racism initiatives. What's more, every soldier, diplomat, judge, and civil servant collecting a federal paycheck must now undergo mandatory training to learn how to grapple with their own unearned privilege and work for a country that is irredeemably shot through with systemic oppression. But as Jewish voices have been warning for years, anti-racism has a troubling blind spot when it comes to Jews. They are either omitted or framed as colonialist oppressors. As Canada's strongest bastions of anti-racism thought now openly cheer terrorism and call for Israel's destruction, is not entirely off-brand for an ideology that has often framed Jews as standard bearers for white supremacy. Critical race theory simplistically erases the uniqueness of the Jewish experience and identifies Jews as white, CRT oppressor class, reads a critique by Russell A. Shalev, an Israeli lawyer and McGill University graduate, who has credited CRT with fostering a boom of anti-Semitism within academia. That's the end of that article. God help us. In summation, as I mentioned, few of my old leftist friends have any further use for me, other than to mischaracterize and insult me, which I find almost amusing if it weren't for the fact that they have been left bereft of my excellent company and good humor. It might surprise them to know that the source of my renewed interest in understanding what is no doubt a complex topic full of contradictions and hermetic mysteries. I suppose that in order for those who truly seek to upset the apple cart to make everything over in their own image, this was out of necessity, since their ideology makes no sense when examined in the clear light of day, and in comparison to the legacy of responsible government and functional institutions that we inherited from our ancestors, whom they label as patriarchal tyrannists, bigots, unenlightened, and backwards. It is the reason for my awakening that might surprise them, however. My wife is a kind and gentle person. She is educated both by the military at Naval Academy and at Staff College, as well as holds a degree from the University of Oslo. She is calm and above all quiet, in only the way that a Norwegian knows how to be quiet. If you hear someone shouting in the streets of Norway, that person won't be a Norwegian. That behavior is simply not done. She has a deep and abiding love of her culture and her country, whom she has served with stoic resolution despite her not being treated well by those for whom she served faithfully. Her own children disregard her, a sin so heinous that I find their behavior toward their loving mother unconscionable. But enough of that, since other than praying for them, I have no control over the situation, which I must leave in God's hands. So given her gentle and quiet nature, both my detractors and my friends might find it difficult to appreciate that my awakening to the hellish nightmare, which has been caused by the social collectivists, her using Hegel to steer society toward ruin, is due to her and her alone. It was Anna Siri who first opened my eyes to the source of this ideological pathogen, a brain wound so deadly that it has reawakened the basic instincts of mankind to return us to tribalism, anti-Semitism, collectivism, and a remarkable hatred for the freest, most prosperous economies the world has ever seen. All so that we can live smaller, pettier, colder, poorer lives, beholden to those who are playing this dialectical game of globalist monopoly. A world in which two opposites are synthesized into an impossibility. They are attempting to indoctrinate us into believing in two mutually exclusive propositions that any sane person knows should instantly cancel one another out. This is why my wife's kids won't talk to her, for she is guilty of the grievous sin of telling them that reality is their friend and there is no escaping from it. The simulacra that created critical theory has the simulacra that critical theory has created are attempting to replace the very foundations of peace, order, and good governance upon which Canada was founded. Part of our problem as people who believe in personal freedom, morality, and individual autonomy is that since we are individualistic, collective efforts are not our forte. The left excels at this, since Marxism is a globalist phenomenon. So, I wish Jordan Peterson, John Anderson, and Baroness Stroud the greatest successes with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship and its conference which seeks to address these very issues currently underway. May it be as John Anderson wished, that their new effort will be a response to the civilizational moment of Western decline, as liberal democracies are plagued with self-doubt as to their own values and beliefs. For these are the things to think and pray about as we reflect on our own role to challenge the silliness of critical theory and the enormous damage that is wreaked on the West. God bless you all. Again, things to think and pray about and discuss with your family and friends, even if they don't want to discuss them with you. Eh? What do you think about that?